This is a pre-recorded FastCast. If you want to jump forward to any specific parts of the FastCast, feel free to look at this audio-visual table of contents. Thanks. Today's agenda, we're going to talk about Pareto Analysis, histograms, Gage RR, X and moving range control charts, a signal level calculator, and then as I said at the end of the first 15 minutes, we'll have a question and answer. So with that, let's get started. I'm going to open up EngineRoom, and here I'm on my home screen, so I have all of my projects listed on the left side. I'm going to open up a project I already started for us and turn around for us. And here we're going to have our main workspace. So I've already uploaded some data and a couple of studies, but I'm going to show us how to do all of it from scratch. So let's start with the Pareto analysis. So we need some data before we can start doing that. What I'm going to do is hit the plus button in the bottom left to open up a new data source. You'll see it populated right up here at the top of the data sources menu. If I slide that open, you'll see that I have a empty data source that I can work from. So I can either type information here, or I can copy something from Microsoft Excel and paste it directly into this spreadsheet, which is what I'm going to do. So here I've got some data, and it's just a listing of insurance claims. So I'm going to copy that data from Excel and go back into the EngineRoom data source. Click where I want to paste it, and here it is. I'll rename it so that I can recognize it later. And hit the Save Changes button in the bottom right. So you see in this data we've got two different things that we have listed, but it's all the same information. This first is just a stacked column of different kinds of insurance claim issues. And then next to that, in columns B and C, we have a listing of what each of those individual issues were and then how often they occurred. That'll be important in a moment. So to close this data set, I'm going to click it once, and I'm going to go into Measure. I'll get a pop-out menu, and then I'm going to hit Pareto Analysis. We're going to take data from the Pareto Analysis data sheet and put it into this study. So you'll see here that I have a categories variable drop zone and a frequency variable drop zone. This is going to be important based on what kind of data we put in. If we're going to put in either this stacked data with a total combination of all of the different issues that occurred, or if we're going to use this kind of unstacked or tabular kind of table format. So let's start with the stacked version first. So if I want to do that, I can click Pareto Analysis once, take my stacked claims hexagon, which represents that first column, and put it into my categories drop zone. You'll see after I do that, it's going to give me my analysis. So I have my chart, and I have my table statistics on the left. Now, what if I wanted to do this with the table format of the data? Let's open up another Pareto analysis. What I'm going to need to do is take my categories, so what were the 6 different kinds of claims that appeared in that long list. I'm going to drop that into the categories drop zone, and it'll populate for me. Or I can take this unstacked claims quantity, and now it's going to actually populate the quantities that those appeared here. So that's how you can see your Pareto analysis. You may have seen earlier, I'll click and drag this off to delete it, that it's just flat. So by adding that frequency, it's going to populate the exact same output as the first Pareto we ran, but this way you're going to be able to use your table formatted data. So now let's move on to the histogram. Again, I'm going to go into Measure and hit Basic Graphs. I'll get this pop-out menu and I'm going to select Histogram. So for the histogram data that I've already uploaded for us, I'm just going to slide it open to show you. So what we have are different departments in a hospital, and we have wait times within those departments, several different measures that we've taken for each department. I also have, this is unstacked data here, but I've also made a spreadsheet with stacked data. So I'm going to show you how to do both. So in reference to the first spreadsheet we looked at with the unstacked data, I'm going to click my hexagon once, and I'm going to slide each department onto the frequency area here. Notice how I can put multiple in one area. What this is going to do for me is show me a distribution of those different wait times by department. And the way that I can look at the different departments' distributions is by using these tabs that are on the left side of the chart. So here you can see I can toggle between them all. In this case, because of the way that my data was formatted, I'm not going to need to use any kind of grouping variable. It's already going to do it for me. So now let's open up another histogram and take a look with the stack data. So same thing, I'm going to find the data sheet that I have with the stack data, and I'm going to take my wait times and put it into my data variable. If I want to look at the distribution of these wait times as a whole across all the departments, I'm not going to insert a group variable. But let's say I want to do the same thing that I did with the first histogram by separating it by department. I can do that by clicking my department hexagon and putting it up into the grouping variable. And now, just as we did in the very first one, I can toggle through the different tabs to look at the different distributions. Next, we're going to look at Gage RR. And for the example of Gage RR, I'm going to go to Measure, just as I have with all the other tools so far, and find Measurement System Analysis. We have an Attribute Agreement Analysis tool and a Gage RR. For the example of this FastCast, we're just going to do Gage RR. So we see in these drop zones we need a part number variable, an operator name variable, and we're also going to need an operator response variable, or the measurements that they've taken. So with the data that I have, I'm going to slide it open for us, we're going to see that in this appraiser column, I've got a long list of the name Rick. There's also Lucy and Fred. And they've all taken the same amount of measurements and measured the same thing, and then we found out what they actually measured, what was their output there. So if I close this data, click it once to get this pop-out menu for the hexagons, I can take appraiser and put that into the operator name variable. If I take the sample and part, I'm going to put that in the part number variable, drops down to the very top. And then the measurements that they've taken, I'm going to put that in the very bottom hexagon. Drop zone, sorry. That's going to load for me. It's a little larger for all of us to look at. So the very first thing that we'll see is a statistical table on the left, and then our graphs on the right. So this is the first graph that populates. It's the components of variation, but there's other graphs that we can toggle to as well if we want to look at it. So data by parts, data by appraisers. We can look at box plots between Rick, Lucy, and Fred and their measurements that they took. Parts by appraisers interaction plot, an X-bar chart for Rick, Lucy, and Fred, and also a range chart for them as well. And in the statistical table, I want to make one call out. You might notice these light blue tabs that are next to each row item. If you hover over that, it's going to give you a quick description of what that statistic is showing, or what that column is about. So, and also within all the statistical tools, you'll notice that there is a settings button. Formerly, it was labeled as show options. This is just the new way that we've chosen to show it so that it's easier to see and use. So if I were to click settings for Gage RR, and I had some kind of lower and upper spec, and I also had a process tolerance in my historical standard deviation, I could type those in and modify my output. But I'm going to close settings to close that and choose not to do that for this FastCast. So I'm going to close out this Gage RR, and next we're going to go into the X and moving range control chart. So we have the control charts listed under measure and also under control. We realize that you may use the tools within control charts at different times throughout your studies or your projects, so that's one way to facilitate that. But again, if you never wanted to use any of these drop zones, you could just use this search area. So anyway, I'll go into measure, and I'm going to go to my control charts, and I'm going to select my X and moving range chart. Okay, so similar to the way that we did Gage RR in terms of only having one item placed in these drop zones, that same thing is going to apply with this control chart. So I'm going to find the data that I've already uploaded, slide it open just to show us. What we have is a long list of the number of patients for a doctor's office and what dates that quantity of patients came into the office. And I've also added a stage variable, which I'll talk a little bit about in a moment. So I'll click this once to get my pop-out again, and I'm going to put my number of patients into my data variable. I could stop there if I wanted, because you'll see here that I do have my control chart populated. And across the x-axis, though, notice how there's just numbers. So that's just basically saying what measurement number it was, right? Well, if I wanted to add some kind of time orientation to this, I can take my dates and put it into the time order drop zone. And now instead of just having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it has all the dates and their representative number of patients that came in. So kind of outside of the spec of measure, but just to show the functionality here, let's say we had some kind of process change and we wanted to see what that did to our control chart. What I had done in the stage variable data sheet is I have ones listed and then twos. So ones are going to represent the initial process and twos will represent what happened after we made some kind of process change, right? So if I close this out and select the stage drop zone hexagon and put it into the stage drop zone, you'll see that it's going to split my graph into 1 and 2. You're also going to have your table statistics representing those two different stages that we've associated with it, where previously it just had stage 1. So the first chart that you'll see, no matter how you've ran your control chart, is your X bar, but then you're also going to have your moving range chart if you toggle to that with the bottom here, so you can always go back and forth. I'm going to take the stage variable off for now, for the sake of the signal level calculator that we're going to work with in a moment. So I'll close this out, and we're going to go into signal level calculator. There's two ways that you can grab the information that you want out of the signal level calculator, depending on what kind of data you have. So if you have discrete data or continuous data, it's your choice, and you can use them independently while this is open. So let's use the continuous data first, since we were just looking at that control chart. So it's asking us for our calculated average. I could go back into my control chart and look at that statistics table to see what the average was, or I can go into my data set that I have, cursor over the icon that has the values that we're interested in, right, the number of patients, and get my information that way. So I see here that my average is 46.9. So I'm going to type in 46.9. And what's my calculated standard deviation? I'm going to cursor over again to get that pop out. And I see 13.4. So I'm going to type in 13.4. And then what is my upper and lower specs? Let's just use the upper and lower limits from that control chart just for simplicity's sake. So I see here it's 84 for my upper and 9 for my lower. So I can type in 84 for my upper, 9 for my lower, and you'll see that once I've completed that, all the values below are going to populate for me. So at the very bottom, I can see my DPMO, my short-term signal level, and my long-term signal level. Okay, so let's say we didn't want to go that route. I'm going to close this out and open up another one, just to keep it clean. All right, so I've just taken some information out of our course to populate this with. So there's a game in one of the sessions that I'm taking information from. So we need to enter the number of defects first. So we know that we have 137,746 defects. How many units did we produce? 492,022. And how many, enter the number of opportunities per unit. So we have 8. So once I've entered in that information, I can see my DPMO, my short term, and my long term. Also note that when you're using this tool, perhaps you're looking at, you want to get use the signal level calculator for several products. You could click here and type in a product name. Or if you wanted to represent some particular warehouse or something like that, that's always something you could do. And then fill in that information here accordingly. So pretty cut and dry, pretty easy to use. So I'm almost out of time, so that's everything that I wanted to cover today regarding these select measure phase tools that we looked at. I thank you for your time, and again, if anyone wants to stick around, I'll be answering any questions that you might have. So again, thank you for your time, and look forward to more invites for more FastCasts. I'll also be sending out a link to a video and also some of the data sets that we used today too, so you can maybe watch and try it by yourself. So thanks again. I'm going to get into the questions.